In this video, you will learn how to use CSS classes to affect HTML elements in different ways. As you can see, right here we have my favorite poems webpage, and it's got 3 poems on it: The Walrus and the Carpenter, Macbeth, an excerpt from Macbeth, and Birdhouse in Your Soul by They Might Be Giants, and these are some of my favorite poems. But right now they all look pretty much the same. When you look at the headlines, you wouldn't know that there's a difference between any of these poems. They're already styled, but they're all styled pretty much the same. And I want to make a distinction between The Walrus and the Carpenter and Macbeth and Birdhouse in Your Soul, because these poems are fairly different. I mean, The Walrus and the Carpenter and Birdhouse in Your Soul are both pretty silly, whereas Macbeth is a fairly serious play, and this portion of the play is a very serious portion. So I'm going to use CSS classes to change how these poems look. So I'm going to come over here to my HTML, and I'm going to look at my HTML, and as you can see, it's exactly what you would expect. There's my title, and there's a link to my style sheet, and I have my poems listed as in H2s for the headline, H3 for the byline, and then the poems are in block quotes. And I have that the same styling for each one. So I can't just set the style on the H2 because that would make all the H2s look the same, which they already do. So instead, what I want to use is a class. So I'm going to go into the Walrus and the Carpenter's H2, and I'm going to give it a class of silly, because this is a silly poem. And then I'm going to go down to Birdhouse in Your Soul, and I'm going to give it a class of silly as well, because it is also a silly poem. And finally, I'm going to go to the Macbeth excerpt, and I'm going to give it a class of serious, because it's a more serious poem. Now, if I save this and go into my web browser, it's going to look the same when I reload. Can reload, and it's not going to change because all I did was add a class, but there's no styles associated with that class. So to style the specific class, I need to go into my style sheet. So I'm going to open my HTML editor, and I'm going to switch to my style sheet. And here you can see that there's already some styles applied to the document, but my serious and silly classes are not in there. So first I'm going to say that these classes are assigned to the H2 element. And then because they're a class, I use a period or a dot, and then I write silly and 2 curly braces. And then I'm going to add a second class of h2.serious and 2 curly braces. Now for the silly class, I'm going to give these classes a font of, we'll say size 36px, and we'll use a silly font of Comic Sans MS. And then for the serious class, I'm going to give this a font size of 36, and we're going to give it use a serious font like Arial. And then I save this document, and because these classes are in there, when I go to my web browser and hit the reload button, The Walrus and the Carpenter is now written in Comic Sans, which is fairly silly, and Macbeth is written in a serious font like that. And of course, Birdhouse in Your Soul is also written kind of silly. One other neat thing about classes, however, is that you're not just limited to the one class on an element. Say, for example, I want to tell you which poem is my favorite, so I'm going to give it a class of favorite. And you notice here that I'm not even using the H2 element. I can put this on any element at all because I've said dot favorite with no element in the beginning. And I'm going to give this a font, we'll say a text decoration. Decoration of underline. And we'll actually also give it a background color, because that's always nice and bright. And we'll say, how about red? And we probably want to give it a color of white so that it's easier to read. And then we're going to save this. Now, of course, again, if we go into my web page and reload, you're not going to see any changes because I didn't add that class. So let me quickly go in and add the class, and you can find out which is my favorite poem. Okay, I've added the poem, the class. Okay, now I've gone in and I've added the class to one of these 3 poem titles. so that you can find out which one is my favorite. So I'm going to reload the page, and then I'm going to scroll down. It's not Walrus and Clock Carpenter. It's not Macbeth. It's Birdhouse in Your Soul. Yes, that is my favorite poem. And one thing you would notice is that Birdhouse in Your Soul still has the Comic Sans font because it is still listed as a silly poem. So if you go into the HTML and you scroll down, you can see that it still has the silly class. But one thing you'll notice is that I added a space and added the favorite class as well. That lets you add as many classes as you need to whatever element without taking away existing classes. So if you need 3 different classes, you can have 3 different classes. If you need 6, you can have 6. More than 4 or 5 is probably excessive, but if you need that many, then you need that many. If I take away the favorite and save this document and go back and reload, it'll go back to being just silly. Put it back, save it, and it goes back to being red. And so that's how you use CSS classes to affect various elements on your web page.